All right. All right, we're ready? Okay, so contemporary America, we're going to, in this first part of the lesson, we're going to go through the 50s and the 60s. We'll deal with a little bit of the 60s next class. So, post-war prosperity in the 1950s, the end of World War II in 1945 left America with a much larger federal government and also in the position of leader of the free world. I do want you all to understand there is a sharp recession right after the war due to surplus. It also takes the country a little bit of time to readjust and retool away from military production back to consumer production. But this is a big time for corporations. Give me an example of a wartime corporation that will thrive in the post-war era. Okay, that's a good one. Think about one that does military production in the war, and then they come out of the war and they're like, oh, well, now we need to move to commercial production. Good. So Willys, Ford, do I have any muscle car and sports car fans out there? All right, this is a big time for a movement toward low affair with fast cars in the post-war era. Also, Boeing. Yep. Planes. Yeah. So now we're going to go move toward commercial airline. The era also left the Soviet Union in a position to spread their political and economic system of communism, socialism. Obviously, this is the ramp up of the Cold War in the late 1940s and early 1950s. Truman is re-elected in a very close race against Republican Thomas Dewey, governor of New York. This is so close, you can see up here, the Chicago Tribune printed on the headline, Dewey defeats Truman, and Truman ended up pulling it out, and the election of 1948. Truman desegregated the military in 48, oversaw military action in the Korean War in 1950, carried out the Truman Doctrine, containment of communism. He was also, believe it or not, talking about, on the domestic front, a push toward universal health care. Isn't that interesting? Honestly, if there was ever a time to do it, this would have been the time to do it, but that felt too socialistic in this era of the Cold War. As we already know, both China and North Korea became communist after the war ended. In 1950, North Korea invaded South Korea. That ceasefire won't come until 1953. Has anyone out there been to Key West before? Okay. If you ever visit Key West, highly recommend it. It's super nerdy, but Truman's little White House in Key West was where he did a lot of his foreign policy. So if you're down there, check it out. War hero Dwight D. Eisenhower will become the 34th U.S. president. He's a two-termer. He wins the election in 1952. He serves from 53 to 61. He's kind of, remember when we talked about Grant? And it was Grant didn't necessarily seek out the office of the president. The office kind of sought him out. That's kind of what happened with Eisenhower. He was a military general first, politician second. This is the first time we've seen this kind of thing. He was a Cold War combatant. Remember, he institutes massive retaliation. Also, another Cold War issue, the death of Stalin and the rise of Khrushchev in the Soviet Union. And that's when we start to see the arms race ramp up. He's also involved with the start of the space race. He's the father of the American interstate system. Do you have any idea what country inspired this? Where he's like, boom. And he's in Europe, he's like, oh wow. The Germans, the building of the Autobahn. So he like looks around after the American occupation of Germany happens. He's like, oh, we need to interconnect the interstate system. And you guys have probably not even realized it, that there's signs that say Eisenhower Interstate System, where it's got like the 5-star general symbol. A lot of that also coincides with the Cold War. He doesn't really do a whole lot for civil rights, but I did add an additional note for you guys that I would like for you to maybe jot down. He will appoint Chief Justice Earl Warren, and the Warren Court will do more for civil rights than any previous court in American history. And then do keep in mind, Eisenhower's vice president was Richard M. Nixon. Nixon, remember, was a rising star in Congress, had been a member of HUAC, the House on Un-American Activities Committee, and Nixon will start after the presidency of Eisenhower, his bid to become the Republican candidate in the election of 1960, and then ultimately down the road, Nixon will win the presidency in the election of 1968. Any questions up to this point? All right, Levittown and the boom generation during the 1950s, great social changes were underway in America. Huge suburban housing tracts were built. This starts in Levittown, New York. How many of you guys have been to the near West End of Richmond? Or like the area of Forest Hill? Or the area of like near where Freeman is? Like I lived there for like 7 years. And you'll notice like all these houses are cookie cutter. A lot of them are like Cape Cods. Those houses were built in the 50s. They were emulating what was happening in this era. I'm glad you brought up Sears earlier. They get into the housing game. Seriously, you could buy modular housing from Sears and have it built, which is pretty crazy. Millions of young Americans that survived World War II got married, had large families. Like my mom is one of 5. And my great aunts and uncles, they had big families, a massive family, extended family. This baby boom generation comes into the world in the post-World War II era. Remember, the GI Bill has a very big impact here, because what could these young Americans do with their GI Bill benefit? What could they do with their GI Bill benefit after the war? Pay for college, good. And they could also use it to get what type of loan? A home loan. Good. So they could get home loans, and they could also go to college. So some people scrutinize the growth of suburbia, but a lot of young Americans saw this as the next big step toward achieving the American dream. Tragically, and I think we need to mention this, this is going to be very problematic for the African American community as well as other minority groups, because what will ensue here in the post-war era is what is called redlining. This is where African Americans and minority groups are denied home loans and lines of credit, even though they have their GI Bills in hand, right? And this becomes a generational problem, and we don't see the first steps to solving this problem come about until the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and that Fair Housing Act, the Civil Rights Act of 1968. So on the top right there, that's what Levittown looked like. The bottom right, look at all those baby boomers. They're all just onward and upward for the boomers. All right. So America in the 50s, I don't want you to think that America moves away from blue-collar work in the 50s. It doesn't. American manufacturing is going to be robust in the 50s and 60s. But what I do want you to understand is with more college opportunity for people that wouldn't have had it prior to World War II, now you have an increase in white-collar jobs. You also have the growth of corporations. General Motors, Ford, IBM, AT&T, Boeing, the list goes on and on and on with the growth of corporate America in the post-war era. America also moves back to the gold standard in the Bretton Woods Conference at the end of World War II. So we're going to see the market start to get going in this post-war era. Hard times from the Depression and World War II are over. The sentiment of keeping up with the Joneses goes down, where everybody's going to have the newest TV and the newest car and the newest lawnmower and appliances and whatever. Do we still have that type of thing happening? Of course, right? Major changes in advertising, television. Have you all heard of the show Mad Men before? It's like the whole premise of the show is based around advertising in mainly the 60s, but it sort of spills over from the 50s to the 60s. This is to revamp American consumer culture. Everybody, by the end of the 1950s, has a television, and by the time we get into the 60s, we're going to go from black and white to color television. A lot of economic growth. Labor unions expand the middle class in this era. African Americans, though, continue to live under Jim Crow in the 50s. A big moment for the African American community and for the country to move forward was when Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier in 1947, signed by Brian Trickey and the Brooklyn Dodgers in 1947. Obviously, Brown v. Board is very important. That decision came May 17, 1954, to desegregate schools. This is also when Dr. King comes on the scene, most especially in 57, when King becomes president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. UNIVAC, America's first digital computer made for business use, would not have been possible without the technologies that were developed during World War II. Has anyone ever seen a UNIVAC computer? It's like the size of the back wall. I mean, they're massive. Electric pacemakers, iron lung, advancements in heart surgery. Anyone want to guess what a local institution that, come in. What up?
Do you want a donut really quick?
Oh, thanks.
I don't know which one here.
And you can have paper towels.
Yeah, you go, bud.
Thanks.
Okay. I'll be right back.
So much. So kind. I'll set this here. Get it all over my laptop. All right. So, what local institution is going to start to make advancements in heart surgeries? It is also very controversial. Help me out. Local institution that makes advancements in heart surgeries. Very good. The Medical College of Virginia. But it's controversial because how are they getting the organs to work on? That is an interesting part of the story. So, conversation for later. A vaccine to stop polio was developed by Dr. James Salk. medical doctor from NYU. The process starts in the early 50s. It becomes licensed in 1955. I don't think we can even begin to understand how big of a deal this is, because no one in this room has ever had to deal with polio or the threat of it. But at this period of time, polio was prior to this, polio was a very horrible disease that people all over the country and the world contracted. So the eradication of polio was big. And then the launch of Sputnik. This changes everything for us. This is where we ramp up the space race, because we're embarrassed internationally by the Russians. Who out there has seen October Sky? Jake Gyllenhaal. It's a good one, right? It's all about starting the space race. So this will also intensify the American-Soviet rivalry. So on the left, we have Jackie Robinson. In the center, we got Dr. King. And on the right, we have Dr. Jonas Salk. Do you have any questions up to this point? Okay, space race and entertainment. American schools beefed up instruction in math and science. Education became a larger priority, but not for all. But for many, the push for math and science becomes far more robust. And think about all of the science and math courses that you have the opportunity to take. It's pretty insane, right? How many of you all in your academic careers in a year have doubled up on math or science? There you go. Multiple people. So the space race was on, along with a far more dangerous arms race. The Soviets developed intercontinental ballistic missiles. Both the Soviets and the Chinese are doing nuclear tests. The hydrogen bomb was a frightening new atomic weapon that both the Soviets and the Chinese were testing in the 50s. Remember in the Cold War, we talked about the Klaus Fuchs spy ring. The main entertainer of the 50s, and the way you received a lot of your news, though people did sit down and read the newspaper day in, day out. To my grandmother's almost dying days, the woman read 2 newspapers a day. She called the television the idiot box. So you have talk shows, sitcoms, soap operas. Nearly every home has a TV in the 50s. By the 60s, every home will have a television. It becomes more affordable. Sports, news. But you only have how many channels? 3. You have ABC, CBS, and NBC. We're not cable. Isn't there yet. Nor is public television. PBS doesn't exist yet. By the time we're done today, though, I'll explain where it comes from or how it comes about. Some saw television as a creative medium, while others saw it as a vast wasteland. I would agree with that today, right? Would you not? Like, the way in which we receive content is so much different. Does anybody sit around and watch TV? Some of you might. But a lot of people, hello, welcome. A lot of you guys, probably stream what you watch. Some of that content, powerful. Some of it, total garbage, right? I don't think anyone in the 50s foresaw, the Real Housewives of whatever being a thing. But here we are, right? Rock and roll and R&B come about during this era. Hello, welcome, welcome. Did you guys want these? You don't want them? Would you like these? Okay. Would you like these? Would you like these? All right. Here we go. Glad to have you. All right. So, rock and roll and R&B become popular as the boomers hit their teenage years. How many grandparents out there love Elvis? All right. Awesome. Any grandparents out there love Motown? Hey. All right. Any grandparents out there love the Beatles? All right. There you go. These groups, they came on the scene when they were kids, all right? So the genre is best known, king of rock and roll, Elvis Presley, the king of the jukebox, Louis Jordan. Another pivotal moment occurs in '59, and Barry Gordon founds Motown Records in Detroit. Huge deal. Welcome. Would you like these?
Okay.
All right, cool. All right, questions up to this point? You guys good? All right. JFK in the 1960s. The 60s began with two key issues. Containment of communism, which was like the most bipartisan issue of this era, and civil rights. John F. Kennedy, first Roman Catholic to be elected president, 35th U.S. president in 1960. He defeated Richard Nixon. This is the first election where television plays a big role. And the Kennedys projected an image of sort of, that appealed to young Americans, youthful, educated, idealistic. They called the Kennedy family Camelot. Kennedy had served in World War II. JFK's domestic program was known as the New Frontier. This is where Kennedy called on Americans to serve at home and abroad. This is a push for service in the military. This is the creation of the Peace Corps, a push for civil rights, which he didn't really carry out because some of it he did, but Johnson carries out most of the civil rights agenda. Also, USAID, which has recently come under attack, or at least Doge has gone after. This is for American humanitarian efforts in the Cold War. And also a huge push for the space race. Kennedy will famously say, well, we're going to do the other thing and go to the moon. He doesn't see that happen. He doesn't live to see the lunar landing. But he's got Cold War problems, right? This is when the Berlin Wall goes up. Band pigs in Cuba. Cuban Missile Crisis. But Kennedy, this all comes to a screeching halt on November 22nd. Oh, Vietnam. How could I forget? This is where military advisors are sent into Vietnam to try to prevent the spread of communism. But all this comes to a halt on November 22nd, 1963, when Kennedy is assassinated by ex-U.S. Marine Lee Harvey Oswald in Dallas, Texas. Now, his death is shrouded in mystery because before Oswald can give a motive, he's shot and killed by Jack Ruby. So we still grapple with what happened here. I'm not a big conspiracy theorist. It's funny we have all this stuff here right now. It's very funny. Yeah, I'm sure they did. But this is something I think is important that we often don't think about in our minds, or at least in the minds of Americans since the assassination of Kennedy. He's almost become like a martyr, right? And that's the legacy. But I want you all to realize there were a lot of people in the Deep South that did not like him because of his push for civil rights. So Lyndon B. Johnson takes the oath of office on Air Force One flying out of Dallas and will become the 36th U.S. president. It's going to be LBJ from Texas who carries out those civil rights laws that Kennedy had intended to sign. Questions about Kennedy? All right. So LBJ and the Great Society. LBJ was also concerned with civil rights and poverty in America. He came from very humble beginnings in Texas. Larger than life character, very intimidating, took whatever means necessary to get what he wanted. So in his plan to build a great society for both civil rights and equity, he is going to push for the following programs: welfare, Medicare, Medicaid, government housing, education for the poor, affirmative action, public broadcasting, Head Start, free and reduced lunch and breakfast, which, since they've been passed to date, are very controversial because they are tax-supported programs, right? Some of them have far greater legacies than others. And we're going to talk more about this as we get to the present, all right? The main laws in the form of civil rights, we talked about in the civil rights lesson: Civil Rights Act of 64, Voting Rights Act of 65, and the Civil Rights Act of 68, which dealt with fair housing. He's not technically a two-termer. He's like a term and a half. He will seek re-election in 64, and he will be re-elected. Not re-elected, he'll be elected. But what will tarnish LBJ's legacy will be the ramp up of Vietnam, right? The Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, Operation Rolling Thunder, bringing back the military draft for soldiers. It gets to the point, by the time LBJ is leaving office, people daily are outside the White House picketing, hey, LBJ, how many kids are you going to kill today? Over 58,000 U.S. service members died in the Vietnam War. He will not seek re-election. So this opens up a Pandora's box heading into 68 for the Democrats. Who are they going to circle the wagons around? Well, Bobby Kennedy, of course. But, yeah, and that'll take us into 68. But before we get to 1968, let's talk about hippies and the counterculture. College campuses were a hot spot for mass protests against the war in Vietnam and for civil rights. A new group of young Americans who were anti-war and peace-loving people grew out of this era. They are the hippies. However, they have an interesting lineage, okay? So remember the group after World War I, the Lost Generation? One of the main figures of that was Ernest Hemingway. The Lost Generation in the post-World War I era were a group of nonconformists. Now we get into the post-World War II era, and we have other young nonconformists. And their hot spot is in Greenwich Village in New York City. They are called the Beatniks. All right, the Beatniks, poetry, literature, music, protest, etc. They are huge in ushering in this hippie movement. Who are they? Well, a lot of them are leading writers. Jack Kerouac, author of On the Road, not to be confused with The Road, totally different. On the Road, Ken Kesey, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and of course, J.D. Salinger, author of Catcher in the Rye. Okay, Now, how many of you all have read any of those three books? Okay. Were you grossly offended? No. It's like On the Road. It's a group of young Americans that bug out and take a cross-country trip, and they do some promiscuous things. This doesn't seem super crazy for us, but in this era, this was highly controversial, right? There's also another guy named Allen Ginsberg that's part of this movement. Well, Kesey is from Oregon. So a lot of these folks kind of like bounce back and forth between New York and the West Coast. And then what ultimately happens is that Haight-Ashbury in San Fran becomes the epicenter of the hippie movement. All right? And this movement sparks new music genre. And I don't care what your music is, there's a pretty good chance that the music you love, many of these people inspired those artists. All right? And the political movement in the form of America's youth. Two of the leading voices, Bob Dylan over there on the top right, and Jimi Hendrix. I would assume everyone's heard of these people. Yes. Woodstock is another huge moment in the hippie movement. This occurs in upstate New York in 1969. Pivotal event for the hippies. Questions about the hippies? All right. The Black Power movement emphasized racial pride, economic empowerment, and the creation of political and cultural institutions. The Black Power movement was established by Malcolm X, as we know, assassinated in 1965, later led by Stokely Carmichael, who was part of SNCC and then became part of the Black Panthers, as well as Huey P. Newton, part of the Black Panther Party. Malcolm X, leader of the Nation of Islam movement, pushed a message of black pride and separatism. Many of the modern civil rights groups in the late 60s start to reject nonviolent ideas that were ushered in by Dr. King and the SCLC, especially after his assassination in '68. It also led to the growth of the militant group, the Black Panther Party, established in 1966, and ultimately folded up in 1982. Pivotal moment for the Black Power movement, Tommie Smith and John Carlos's Black Power salute on the podium in the 1968 Mexico City Olympic Games. Questions up to this point? This is kind of a little bit of a review from the civil rights movement. 68 is crazy. Like I said before, the only thing, or there's crazy years that have happened in modern history. 01 was crazy, 9/11. 08 was crazy, the crash of the market, the housing market. 2020 is what I feel I would compare in our lifetime to 68, if that makes sense. 68, very turbulent year in American history, especially in the post-World War II era. I mean, obviously, every year of World War II is turbulent. In January, the Viet Cong led the Tet Offensive. And remember, the Tet Offensive was reported to the American people as America losing the war in Vietnam. And public opinion really starts to turn against the war, and the people that suffer most will be the veterans. Hippies move into San Francisco, and this is like their search for peace, love, and drugs. It caused a dramatic spike in drug abuse in the hippie counterculture, which you brought up earlier. It leads to violence, disease, poverty, and drug abuse, not just in San Fran, but in other places. This also is the rise of the jam rock band, the Grateful Dead. I don't know if I have any deadheads in the house. And I find this interesting when I talk about all this. When your grandparents were born in this boomer era, kind of depends on where they fall in the music genre. right? My older uncle and aunt were like more into like Elvis and the Beach Boys. My mom more into the Beatles. My younger aunt and younger uncle more into the Grateful Dead. It's kind of when they were born. So LBJ announced he would not seek re-election in 1968. The Democrats rally around Bobby Kennedy. As we've already learned, in April of 1968, Dr. King is assassinated in Memphis by James Earl Ray, sparking widespread protests and violence in the country. And on June 6th, Democratic candidate Bobby Kennedy is assassinated in LA. Now the Democrats they got to figure out what they're going to do. Are they going to go with Hubert Humphrey, George McGovern? They go with Humphrey. There's violence at the Democratic National Convention. And there's also another variable in here, and that is the Deep South Dixiecrats. What do you think they are? The Dixiecrats. They're white supremacists. And the face of them is George Wallace from Alabama. So Wallace runs as an independent, taking the white supremacist Democratic vote in the South. Humphrey runs as the Democrat. This opens up the doors for Nixon to win as the Republican candidate, ushering in a very complicated era in American history. Now, I will tell you, I'm not going to kick Nixon around too much. I will a little in terms of Watergate, but Nixon runs, we'll talk about Nixon next class. Nixon is going to run a sort of campaign promise of a return to law and order and an end to the war in Vietnam, an honorable end. Problem is, it's not going to be an honorable end to the war in Vietnam. Had Johnson been able to settle peace in 68, or had Nixon been able to settle peace in 71, that whole dynamic would have been quite different. Highly recommended documentary, 1968 with Tom Brokaw. You guys know who Tom Brokaw is? I'm Tom Brokaw. Brokaw. He was like one of the leading news anchors. He does a really great documentary on the year. All right. So, the Chicano movement, the NOW movement, the Native American movement, and the LGBTQ movement are born out of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So the Chicano movement of the 1960s was led by Cesar Chavez. I know that we want to always think about this as just being about labor, but it is bigger than that. Obviously, this is about improved labor rights, but it's also about improved civil rights for Latinos. Voting rights, equitable pay, access to affordable housing, etc. But it's big for the Latino labor rights movement. With her book, The Feminine Mystique, published in 1963, Betty Friedan broke new ground in exploring the idea of women finding personal fulfillment outside traditional job roles. She also goes on to become the leader and one of the founders of the National Organization for Women. This is giving women more opportunity in education, more opportunity in labor force, trying to shrink the wage gap, a push for affordable health care, affordable child care, etc. And I'm giving you guys love again on your assimilation of UVA. That project was awesome because that's a big step in the right direction when public colleges start to assimilate to allow women to not only earn undergraduate degrees, but also higher degrees, masters, law degrees, medical degrees, the list goes on and on. So she's pivotal in this feminist movement and women's rights movement. Richard Oakes, Mohawk Native American activist, spurred Native American tribes in university curricula, pushing for, and you want to hear something really cool? Yesterday, Crash Course just published their first episode of Native American Crash Course history. I'm very excited about it. He led the Red Power movement. One of the major protests was the occupation of Alcatraz in 1969. There's also a major protest at Wounded Knee in 1973. Harvey Milk, first openly gay politician in the U.S., and is considered the first advocate for equal rights for the LGBTQ community in the 60s and 70s. A major turning point here is the Stonewall riots in New York City in 1969. And another pivotal moment is more recent, Obergefell v. Hodges in 2015 legalized same-sex marriage in the U.S. So again, the civil rights movement is robust, right? Yeah. So this is where we pump the brakes today. Women's liberation of the 60s and 70s. Yeah, it starts in the 50s, but well, really it starts in the post-World War II era. Think of all the opportunities women had in World War II, and they don't want to give that up, you know? So women's liberation important in this era. The courts provided more legal decisions for equal rights in labor and education. The NOW was really big there, the National Organization for Women. Women had won rights through the Civil Rights Act of 1964, but were denied. Like, for example, my experts up front here, tell them a little bit about UVA when women were first admitted.
1970.
Right, but before that, the women that went there,
They couldn't graduate. They couldn't walk places.
they couldn't graduate and they couldn't walk. So they go to class, yet they can't earn a degree. Very good. Thank you. These are major changes. Women increasingly made up a large percentage of America's labor force in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Many working mothers entered the labor force. They need affordable daycare and equitable pay. And we're still trying to get through this, right? We're still trying to close wage gaps. We're still trying to provide affordable daycare. Daycare is expensive. The second mortgage. Women worked in non-traditional jobs, doctors, lawyers, engineers. They're breaking the glass ceiling. More higher education opportunities for women with assimilation. Sandra Day O'Connor, top right, becomes the first woman to serve on the U.S. Supreme Court, appointed by Ronald Reagan. Sally Ride there in the middle. She becomes our first female astronaut, American astronaut, in the NASA space program. I know there's a cosmonaut that made it to space first. I get that. But she's the first American. Any idea where those two ladies went to college? A very prestigious school in California. Very good. They went to Stanford. And then on the bottom right there, very important woman in the women's liberation movement and the civil rights movement, that's Shirley Chisholm. She was the first African-American woman to be elected to Congress in 1968 from New York. She has a really great quote that I love. She said, if you don't have a chair, or if you don't have a seat at the table, bring your own chair. Always like that. So, do you guys have any questions up to this point? Awesome. This is where we're going to pump the brakes for today.